Okay, so now we're going to be moving into our main talk. The Executive Director of Houston Oasis, Mike Alice, is going to be giving the main talk today. And I think most of us are very familiar with Mike's work. And so I think we're just going to sit back, relax, and listen to Denominations 101.
Back when I was working as a pastor in the church world, I had a friend who was a Roman Catholic priest, who's pastor of a large parish in another city. And when I was visiting that city, I would sometimes stay with him, and at the rectory there at the church, always had a good time. They had a nice crew of priests there, very nice guys. And we were having breakfast one morning in the kitchen of the rectory. Delightful breakfast prepared by their parish-trained private chef who worked for them. And I'm not joking. This is such a huge parish. It's one of those churches that had daily mass at 8 a.m. every day. And we were sitting there having breakfast, and it's about 7:55, and my friend suddenly looks at his watch and says, "Uh-oh." And he looks at me and says, "Time to go kill Jesus." I'm like, what? And then, so I thought, well, that's an interesting take on the sacrament of Holy Communion. And, so what I went and looked it up in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which they assure me is an international bestseller. And if you're ever like doubting your secularism, I would encourage you to buy a copy of this book and just open up to a random page. I kind of did that the other day. So this is, my friend was right when he said it's time to go kill Jesus, because the Catechism of the Church says the sacrifice of Christ and the sacrifice of the Eucharist are one single sacrifice. Quote, the victim is one and the same. The same now offers through the ministry of priests who then offered himself on the cross. Only the manner of offering is different. And since it is this divine sacrifice which is celebrated in the Mass, the same Christ who suffered himself once in a bloody manner on the altar of the cross is contained and offered in an unbloody manner. This sacrifice is truly propitiatory. So it is a repetition, they say, of the sacrifice of Jesus dying on the cross in an unbloody way, but is nevertheless kind of a re-crucifixion. And so my friend, he was a very sharp guy, and he was having fun with this theology when he said that. And I'm like, and I think he was kind of, when he said that, in a sense he was kind of winking at me, saying he knows that this is, anyway. I'm always cognizant that we're recording this stuff. I would be so much more free if we didn't record everything. But, yeah, well, okay, that's a thought. Anyway, and it's just a reminder that, because for me when he said that, it's like, whoa! And then it's a reminder that when someone tells you they're a Christian, it doesn't tell you a lot about them, because there are so many different ways of being a Christian, so many different ways of thinking about things, so many different ways of worship. There are literally thousands and thousands of denominations. I'm giving this talk today kind of out of popular requests by you guys, because you've been asking me questions all the time about all the different denominations. I asked a few of you if you'd like a talk on it, and they said, yeah, so let's go for it. So that's what we're going to do today. What I'd like to do is give a 5 to 10 overview of like all of 2,000 years of church history. And then talk about the main reasons why denominations arise, and then open it up to Q&A, because already you guys have been asking me a lot of questions this morning, even prior to the talk. So, the first 3 centuries, first 300 years of the history of the Christian church was really marked by, there's this myth that there was like this once one pure holy church, and it just kind of fragmented. But actually, the history of the earliest church was right from the get-go. You had this huge diverse variety of Christian groups, and groups inspired by the figure of Jesus, and some groups were more Jewish, some groups incorporated more Greek philosophy into their approach, some groups incorporated like stuff from the Roman mystery cults into, and you see traces of that even lingering in Roman Catholicism today. And so what happened was a gradual coming together and kind of battling out among these early Christian bodies. And at the end of 300 years, one dominant strain of Christianity triumphed, and that was the Pauline version, the version of Paul of Tarsus. And I've talked about that in other talks. Okay, so what we have is just, what we think of as like normative Christianity, Orthodoxy today was just the one model that won out, kind of like VHS triumphing over Betamax or something. You know what I mean? It was the religious operating system that won. It wasn't because it was more accurate or more true or more pure or anything like that. It was just a result of the geopolitical facts on the ground. So then at the end of 300 years, you do have this kind of more or less unified Catholic Church thing going on. First big break in that comes in 1054 of the Common Era. Not AD, but CE, Common Era. 1054, and that's called the Great Schism. And the church split into what? East and West. So that's where we have the Latin Church, the Western Church, Roman Catholicism. Eastern Church is Eastern Orthodoxy. That would be your Greek Orthodox, Slavic countries, Russian Orthodox, and some in Ethiopia. Today, still about 300 million. So today you have about 1 billion Roman Catholics. If there were no Muslims in the world, if there are no other Christians in the world other than Roman Catholics, Christianity would still be the largest religion on earth by virtue of Catholicism alone. But then Orthodoxy is pretty darn huge with some 300 million people. In fact, they have a different calendar. In fact, today is Eastern Orthodox Easter. So, Christos Anesti. When no one knows what to say. Actually, the only person who knows what to say was here earlier, and she's not here. That's how you say Happy Easter in Greek. Literally, Christ is risen. Oh well. Like you care. Anyway, it gets you places in Greece on Sunday. Okay. Why was there a split in 1054? Well, a lot of it was political power struggles between East and the West. A lot of it was struggling over the power of the Pope, and the people in the East didn't want to give the Pope so much power. And then they quibbled about whether you used unleavened bread or leavened bread in communion. So the Western Church uses unleavened bread, little flat wafers. And if you go to Eastern Orthodox Church, they're going to give you chunks of leavened bread. It's quite tasty, actually. They had some other minor issues, but that was here's the big one, actually. The Filioque Clause. And I'm sharing this with you not just to share a historical minutia, but to give you the sense of kind of how splits happen among religions. So the Filioque Clause is in the Nicene Creed, which is a creed, a statement of belief recited in Catholic and Orthodox and Anglican and Lutheran churches and many others every Sunday. You get to the part about the Holy Spirit, and you say, I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son in the West, but in the East they only say from the Father. And that phrase, and the Son, in Latin is filioque. And because the Greeks believed that the Holy Spirit only proceeds from the Father, but the Romans and Latin Roman Church believed that it proceeded from the Father and the Son, they split. They were like really went to the mat over those three words. But of course you can't prove any of this. Next big split in the Western Church came in 1517, of course, with the Protestant Reformation, which was instigated by the life and writings and works of Martin Luther. And the key issues there, and then again, power of the Pope was a big one. They kind of took issue with the fact that the Pope was trying to kind of charge money to release souls from purgatory, and if you paid enough money, you could get relatives out of purgatory, like immediately, which was kind of a good deal. And if you didn't know what purgatory is, it's a holding place, like for people who aren't going to hell. If you're going to heaven, but you're not good enough to get to heaven immediately, you had to do what my Catholic friends still call burn time in purgatory before you get there. Other issues involved in the Protestant Reformation, again, access to scriptures and worship in the vernacular language, in your local language, rather than in Latin. The ability of people to read and interpret the Bible on their own and not needing a priestly class to interpret it for them. Priestly celibacy was another issue. So a whole bunch of issues came to head during the Protestant Reformation. And then and that really kind of opened the floodgates of the proliferation of new versions of Christianity, unlike anything that had happened before. So people started saying, well, if Luther can do it, we can do it too. So John Calvin comes along, and he starts basically a Calvinist. He has his own brand called Calvinism. He names it after himself. He didn't. That's what people called it. We can get into some of the details on Calvinism later if you want. If you heard my talk, Accidental Calvinism, which I kind of put my theory out there about all of us are living in the background radiation of the Calvinist Big Bang that started what is now the United States of America, and it influenced into drinking water. That was also a result of the Protestant Reformation. At first, the Church of England was still Roman Catholic, and Henry VIII was a big opponent of Martin Luther, and he wrote a little pamphlet against Martin Luther, and the Pope gave Henry VIII a really special medal that he could wear, calling him a defender of the faith. They invented an award for him, and actually it's a title that the Queen of England still bears to this day in her long list of titles, because it was bestowed upon Henry VIII by Pope Leo X. And so the Pope and Henry VIII were good friends, and Henry VIII didn't like Martin Luther until Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and the Pope wouldn't let him. Then he didn't like the Pope so much, and so he started his own church. And that is not an oversimplification. That's pretty much how it happened. So that's the beginnings of the Church of England. And of course, the American branch of the Church of England is the Episcopal Church. Is the American branch of the C of E, your British friends will call it, the Church of England, which is still the established church of the United Kingdom. Well, actually, only England, because Scotland has its own church. Anyway, so that became known as the English Reformation. Then out of the English Reformation, you had separatist movements. People in England who feel like the English Reformation didn't go so far, because really Henry VIII and the leaders of the Church of England didn't change much. They just kept acting Catholic, and they went out and flipped the sign on the front of the building. So for some people, that wasn't far enough, and they wanted to purify things, and they became the Puritans, right? And there's other kinds of separatists that came out of that. Some of these groups protesting the Catholic-y feel of the Church of England read the Bible and says, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about baptizing babies, so we're going to start baptizing only people who can say they want to be baptized, and they became known as the Baptists. And the first historical record of any reference to the Baptists is 1609 in Amsterdam, where a lot of these guys fled to from England so they could do their Baptist-y thing without the persecution of the Church of England. And you'll remember a lot of the pilgrims had roots in the Netherlands too. So that's the first reference anywhere to anything like a Baptist is 1609 in Amsterdam. So, and then of course out of the Church of England, we got a movement that started by a priest of the Church of England, a guy named John Wesley. And his movement became known as the Methodist Church. Now, John Wesley did not start the Methodist Church. He never technically left the Church of England. He was a priest in the Church of England, who started a reform movement. But like it always happens, people ran with his idea and then started their own thing, which became Methodism. And then just to take it a little further, in the mid 1800s, actually mid to late 1800s in this country, there were Methodists who thought the Methodists weren't being methodical enough and needed to take it another direction, become even more pure, and they started what became known as the Holiness movement, out of which came churches like the Church of the Nazarene. When I come down here, I drive, we got a Nazarene back there. Hey, Brian. Recovering Nazarene, right? Yeah. So we get the Nazarenes from John Wesley, who came out of the Church of England. No, we get the Nazarenes from the Methodists, from John Wesley, who came out of the Church of England, which came out of the Roman Catholic Church. You see how, and this is how it all has continued to happen. We can follow that with almost every group you name. We could try that game later. So it's fascinating how it just evolves. Now, then one more big movement. So we've talked about Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. We've talked about the Protestant break. There's one more big one, and we talked about the English Reformation. One more big movement we need to talk about because it's fairly recent. We've all heard of Pentecostals, right? Uh-oh. We've seen speaking in tongues, but I think we have some former Pentecostals here today. Pentecostal movement is massive and it's relatively recent. It started in 1906. Anyone know where the roots of Pentecostalism are? You're very close. Mark guessed San Francisco, Ken? Azusa. Well, Azusa, it's in Los Angeles. It's a street. Azusa Street in Los Angeles, where you had like kind of the very first kind of Holy Spirit revival ever in this country, and people got so excited about it. It grew and it grew, and people soon came from all over the United States, soon came from all over the world to experience this Azusa Street revival, which started in 1906 and lasted like 3 entire years. And the people from all over the world who came and experienced the excitement of Pentecostalism, which of course is marked by a very emotive form of worship, spiritual healings, and then the most important component of Pentecostalism is the belief that a believer shows that you're really a believer, like you're really in the in club, you really got the thing, if you show the manifestation of the Holy Spirit, which is most often manifested in a speaking in tongues. Well, of course, Pentecostalism has grown probably faster than any other form of Christianity in the entire history of Christianity, because now you have, like in Latin America, which has traditionally been just predominantly Roman Catholic. Now, these guys, with their very exciting worship, are giving the Catholic Church a run for the money. So it's very interesting to see how that's developing. It's clearly a more fun version of Christianity if you throw out the hatred and everything. So real quickly, in general, why denominations? Why do new denominations spring up? In general, differences in doctrine, right? How old can people be before you baptize them? Or what does communion represent? In the Roman Catholic Church, you're literally consuming, in an unbloody way, the body and blood of Jesus. Other types of Protestant churches, it's merely a representation. They don't think anything mystical happens. So you have differences over doctrine. You have differences over worship. And we have this entire spectrum from high church to low church. High church is lots of ceremony. Vestments and candles and incense and what we used to call smells and bells. Low, that's a term. And then low church, it'd be the extreme end of the low church, you could imagine like a Quaker meeting house where people just come and sit and wait for somebody to say something. And there's no ritual. Yeah, like us. Yeah. But in a sense, and this is a topic worth exploring another time, is that all human beings are ritualistic. We have rituals. We've only been around a little over 3 years, so we got a ton of rituals already. Now we never sat down and designed them; they just happen. So we got doctrine, worship, differences in government. Many denominations, and the name of the denomination says something about their beliefs about church government. So in the Episcopal Church, Episcopal is a reference to the Greek word for bishop. It is a church generally governed by bishops. But then you have congregational churches, where churches are autonomous congregations, like the Southern Baptist Convention, which technically does not even consider itself a denomination. They see themselves as an association of independent congregations. And then finally, the last big reason why denominations emerge, there's a lot of politics and history involved. The Southern Baptist Church was formed in 1845 over the issue of slavery. So in fact, the continued existence of the Southern Baptist Church is still kind of this vestigial reminder of the time in our country when churches were literally split over whether or not you could have slavery. Obviously, the Southerners were on the pro side of slavery. The Southern Baptist Convention, I believe, has denounced slavery eventually. It took them a while, and a war. Methodists split north and south, Presbyterians split north and south. Some of them got together again at the end of the war, which should have been, anyway, that's another topic. Anyway, so, even today, in People's Republic of China, we have two big Catholic churches. You have the official state-sanctioned Catholic Church, which their worship looks Catholic, their doctrine looks Catholic, they have Catholic priests, but it's all basically answerable to the government of the People's Republic of China. But then there is this other non-sanctioned Catholic Church that's in communion with the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. So those are, I think, doctrine, worship, governance, politics, and history are reasons why why we have so many different varieties of Christianity. I got one more. I'm going to close with a quick thought, and then we're going to do Q&A. Time flies. I can't believe how long I've been talking at you already. Okay, in the process of preparing for this talk, researching for this talk, I was reviewing, and this is an excellent book. If you're interested in the history of Christianity, this is still considered one of the best textbooks. It's called History of the Christian Church, Williston Walker. We always just called it Williston Walker because that's his name. But this is still considered, one of the best comprehensive histories of Christianity ever. And as I was doing research for our talk today, and I was reading the chapter about the Scottish Reformation, which you'll notice I didn't even get to. But this really struck me. I'm having trouble reading in the dark with my bad eyes, so I'm just like this. This is a random paragraph from Williston Walker on the Scottish Reformation. And I'm just going to read a dry history passage to you, and I think you'll see where I'm going. Protestant beginnings were made in Scotland not long after the Reformation got underway. Patrick Hamilton, 1504 to 1528, who had visited Wittenberg and studied in Marburg, preached Lutheran doctrine, and he was burned on February 29th, 1528. The cause grew slowly. In 1534 and 1540, there were other executions. Yet, in 1543, the Scottish Parliament authorized the reading and translation of the Bible. It was but a temporary phase due to English influence, and by 1544, Cardinal Beaton and the French party were employing strong repression. Chief of the preachers at this time was George Wishart, 1513 to 1546, who was burned by order of Cardinal Beaton on March 2nd, 1546. On May 29th, himself was brutally murdered, partly in revenge. Why am I laughing about people being murdered? Partly in revenge for Wishart's death and partly out of hostility to his French policy. The murderers gained possession of Beaton's castle of St. Andrews and rallied their sympathizers there. In 1547, a hunted Protestant preacher, apparently a convert and certainly a friend of Wishart, of no considerable previous conspicuousness, took refuge there with them and became their spiritual leader. This was John Knox, to be the hero of the Scottish Reformation, and that's why, like, every third Presbyterian church you run into is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, because they named it after the castle where the murderers took refuge. So, okay, so that's like in the space of like less than 20 years, how many murders do we read about? Over what? Over people disagreeing about imaginary things that they claim they believe and couldn't prove. And that brief little snippet, that one paragraph on the Scottish Reformation, is very descriptive of the whole story. And that's why I think we have this incredible moment where it's not just us in Houston today, but we have people in Kansas City, people in Logan, Utah, people in Provo, Utah, meeting. I can't even keep track anymore. Already meeting this morning. We're going to announce on, I think, Monday or Tuesday, the launch of 2 new communities next Sunday that are going to start meeting every week. And that's why I think in the Oasis movement, we have this opportunity to do something new in human history where people can get together and not kill each other over that. Which is another way of saying people are more important than beliefs. Thank you. I'm sorry for laughing about the brutal murder of Cardinal Beaton. That was inappropriate. I'm going to let our MC. We may point at people, or you going? Oh, yeah, she's already doing it. I'm sorry. Verina's in charge of taking the
I've got it now.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, now that there's such a rise in the megachurch and the prosperity kind of church or whatever, that are really centralized around a personality, even when it's passed down, like the Osteens, that can't go on forever. Do you think those will ever coalesce into true denominations rather than non-denominational?
I think the really big, really big. Now, bear in mind, the whole enterprise is going down. Americans are, despite the apparent success of megachurches, they are kind of an anomaly in terms of where the culture is going, with increased secularism, decreased church attendance in general. The short answer to your question, and that's really a big topic, the short answer to your question is the really big churches almost function as denominations unto themselves. One example is a church called Willow Creek Church in Chicago, which was one of the earliest of the mega churches, a very dynamic pastor up there named Bill Hybels, who became very, very influential, especially in the Protestant world. Through his books and his writings, they became mega before almost anybody else became mega. Well, Schuller out in California was first, really. And so they hold their own conferences, and they have their own publishing houses, and they even launch new mission churches around the country. And then they formed something called the Willow Creek Association, where churches of different denominations who subscribe to their kind of leadership style and wanted to learn more from him. So to get back to what Verena was saying, they kind of function as mentors. So some of these mega churches almost function as de facto denominations in and of themselves. So yeah, but I don't see them forming like new mega church denominations, probably. Oh, got one. Okay.
So where does Mormonism fit in this whole thing, or is it like a whole separate thing on its own?
Mormonism is, it came about in a really interesting time, and the American religious history is just crazy, it's fascinating. 1830s, there were all kinds of new groups popping up, and it was one of many, many new groups. They saw that Mormonism itself sees itself as discontinuous, but what we would consider historic Christianity. People who are active Mormons talk about the restoration. That is, Joseph Smith received a revelation directly from heaven, or delivered through Moroni or whatever, that he was commissioned with restoring Jesus' original plans, which apparently everybody else messed up. And it was their job to restore true Christianity. So it is kind of an outlier in terms of like these other groups I've talked about. You can direct their lineage directly from pre-existing Christian denominations, and Mormonism was something kind of brand new. And we could talk about Mormonism forever. Fascinating stuff. Yeah.
I have a question that sort of affects me from years back. Would you speak briefly about hyper-Calvinism and supralapsarianism versus the Arminian argument? What kind of a mess that makes for everybody?
It's a big mess. Arminian. I'm going to mess this up. I was worried someone was going to ask me about Arminianism. I had a nightmare that someone was going to ask me about Arminianism. Okay. But you did remind me of something I wanted to share with you guys that I forgot to share. But that is an example, and it sounds like you could probably answer it better than I could, but it is an example of the kinds of things that Christian went to the mat over and still go to the mat over. Like, and I hadn't heard the term super I've heard the term prelapsarian double predestination. Is that super predestination? That's like a longer version of what you just said. So, where prelapsarian double predestination, hardcore Calvinist doctrine, that even before each one of us is born, God had already decided who is going to heaven and who's going to hell, and there's nothing you can do about it. So we're just kind of living things out, watching what happens, but everything's been decided. Like a super rigorous doctrine of determinism, and of course God's done the determining. That's like classic Calvinism, which got, in recent years, strangely enough, that kind of died away because people thought this is kind of cruel and mean and, not great. And so the classic Calvinism kind of drifted away until recently. There's been a resurge in something called Neo-Calvinism. The Neo-Calvinism movement was being led out of, I believe, Minneapolis by John Piper, and then he's older now, and he has younger kind of hipster passages young hipster pastors wearing like tattoos and, intimidating clothing, and they're very cool and in tune with the times, except they're basically preaching the theology of the 1600s Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they're drawing a crowd, oddly enough. So there's a resurgence in Arminians did not believe in the prelapsarian double predestination, but rather you could freely respond to God's grace, and so your salvation was not predetermined. And then you find threads of this thought in all different types of denominations to different degrees. Yeah. Did you want to add on to that?
No. With the Arminians, and I'm sorry for the voice, this is all.
Oh, it's okay.
You could lose your salvation if you screwed up.
You can lose your salvation if you screwed up. That's been a kind of, people still argue about this. Is it once saved, always saved, or not? Christians continue to argue about questions like this. Okay, Ed.
Mike, one of the other things that I've always found fascinating, the distinction between Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism, was a big fight about the way they crossed themselves.
Oh, I'm not sure it's a big fight, but it's definitely a difference in style. Roman Catholic Church, they cross from left to right, Eastern Church from right to left. I'm not sure they really see that as a doctrine to fight about, but it is a difference in worship style that arose. But they have other doctrinal differences for sure.
Do we have time for more questions?
Let's do one. Let's do one more. We're running out of time. Yeah. And if you have others, I'll be happy to take some afterwards. Or talk to you over lunch or whatever. Yeah.
So, my question is a joke that I hope you can explain to me. Woman's in a Catholic church praying. Jesus Christ himself walks in and starts saying, "I'm here, come with me," and she turns around and says, "Shh, talking to your mother." I
don't get it. Mary has achieved a status in Roman Catholicism that is it's really fascinating. She has a status in Catholicism that she has in no other version of Christianity. She is venerated. There was even a movement during the reign of Pope John Paul II, the predecessor to Benedict. There was an actual movement within Catholicism to name her co-redemptrix, which means co-redeemer. Like they wanted to promote Mary to make her kind of on par with Jesus. And there was a feeling, and because John Paul II was super devoted to Mary, because remember when they had the assassination attempt, he, for the rest of his life, thanked Mary for saving him. It was like, okay. So he was like super devoted to Mary. And so they felt, the co-redemptrix party felt like they had a chance of getting her promoted. But then there were other theologians at the Vatican who warned him that if he took that step, like all other Christians would break off relationships. So it's really, there's obviously no logic behind this whatsoever. There's precious little history. There's very, very little said about Mary in the Bible. This is all legend, tacked onto alleged visions that people have had. But of course, the figure of Mary has become, especially in Latin American culture. She's more important in different parts of Catholicism than other places. But look at the role of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico. That's just astonishing. And so it would be really interesting to try to figure out, why what is the psychological draw? My particular feeling was that in the Middle Ages, Jesus became progressively more scary, with lots of talk of impending judgment and doom and sending people to hell. So you needed somebody kind of more warm and loving in the Godhead to relate to, and that's how Mary kind of emerged. But that's just my personal theory. So I think we have to wrap it up. This is the thing I wanted to mention to you, because if you call yourself, a Methodist or a Baptist or Presbyterian or whatever, that doesn't even tell you much either, because then you have to decide what type you are. And this is a partial listing of the Baptist groups just in the United States. Southern Baptists, of course, then you have the American Baptist Association, you have the American Baptist Churches, you have the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, you have Free Will Baptist, Primitive Baptist, Missionary Baptist, Sovereign Grace Baptist, and I've heard of all these groups. General Six Principle Baptist, Two Seed in the Spirit Predestinarian Baptists. And I found 41 listed in the United States alone, different Baptist groups, some of whom dislike each other as much as they dislike other denominations. So,
You need a yes/no chart.
you need a what?
A
A yes/no chart, yeah. So, I hope you had fun. I had fun. And if you have more questions, get with me afterwards. Thank you.